Am I the a-hole for refusing to have kids after my husband's assumption? I, 26F, have been married to my husband, Damon, 34M, for about a week. We've been together for 4 years and met on Hinge. Before anyone asks, yes, I realize how ridiculous it sounds that we apparently never had a proper conversation about children before getting married. I'm aware. Please judge me accordingly. When we first met on Hinge back in 2022, I had my profile explicitly set to I don't want kids under the kids and family section. I wanted to put that boundary out there right away so there would be no confusion down the road. Damon's profile, on the other hand, didn't have anything selected at all. I saw that blank space and, for whatever reason, assumed he was either completely indifferent about kids or didn't really care either way. I had already decided long before meeting him that I didn't want children. It wasn't a temporary phase, it wasn't something I was unsure about, and it wasn't something I thought I might change my mind on as I grew up. I've always felt pretty strongly that motherhood just isn't something I want for my life. We've been together for 4 years and, honestly, we've talked about everything. We've sat up until 3 in the morning discussing our finances, our long-term career goals, our extended families, where we want to buy a house, our plans for marriage, our future travel destinations, literally everything you could think of. Except kids. I know. Stupid. 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 It genuinely never came up as an actual sit-down conversation because, to me, it wasn't an open question. I didn't want kids, so I never thought I needed to re-announce it every 6 months, like a breaking news broadcast. I had also told my own parents years ago that I didn't want children. Coming from a fairly traditional and cultural family, that was actually a massive, deeply uncomfortable conversation for me. It took years of tearful arguments and a lot of convincing for them to finally accept that I wasn't going to follow the traditional path of getting married and immediately pumping out grandchildren. Damon knew about those fights. He knew how much stress it caused me and how unhappy my parents were about it initially, so I naturally assumed he understood how serious I was about that choice. Anyway, we got married about a week ago. The wedding was beautiful, surrounded by our family and friends, and I truly felt like I was stepping into the happiest chapter of my life. But that feeling didn't even last 24 hours. On our wedding night, after the reception had cleared out and we were finally unwinding in our room, Damon turned to me with a soft, nostalgic smile on his face. He looked at me and said something along the lines of, "It's crazy that we can finally start our family now." I was a little confused by the phrasing, assuming he was referring to our ongoing running joke, so I just chuckled and said, "Yeah, Milo is going to love having a little ragdoll sibling." For context, Milo is our indoor cat, and I have been begging him for ages to let us adopt a second cat so Milo wouldn't be lonely. Damon's smile instantly vanished. He just stared at me blankly, the silence stretching out between us until he said, "I mean a human baby." I genuinely thought he was joking at first. I let out a nervous laugh, waiting for the punchline, but his face remained completely deadpan. He wasn't joking at all. My stomach sank into a heavy knot. I reminded him firmly that I didn't want kids and pointed out that my Hinge profile literally stated that from the very first day we matched. Damon didn't even flinch. He calmly told me that he had seen it back then, but he just assumed I would eventually grow out of it. I sat there on the edge of the bed, utterly stunned. Apparently, he has always wanted children and secretly believed that once we got officially married, I would naturally change my mind and step into the mother role. He then started talking about how he's getting older, pointing out his age, and saying he wants to have his own biological kids soon. He said he doesn't have forever to wait around and that he needs to become a father. I understand that he is 34 and that if having biological children is important to him, he might feel like he's running out of time. But I'm honestly struggling to understand how this somehow became my responsibility when he knew from the very beginning that I didn't want children. If having kids was this profoundly important to him, why on earth did he never bring it up during our entire 4-year relationship? He had 4 whole years. He could have asked me at any point during our relationship, "Do you still feel that way about kids? Or would you ever consider having children down the line?" Instead, he saw something very clear and fundamental about my future that I had explicitly stated, and he unilaterally decided in his head that I would eventually surrender and change my mind for him. I also know people will probably point out our age gap. I'm 26 and he's 34, so yes, there is an 8-year difference between us. But weirdly enough, I've always been the more mature one in the relationship. I'm the oldest daughter in a fairly cultural and traditional family, so I've had to grow up pretty quickly, take on adult responsibilities early, and learn how to stand my ground on major life choices like this. Damon, meanwhile, has always been the more carefree, go-with-the-flow partner. I'm not saying that to insult him or put him down. It's just part of why this whole situation feels so bizarre and surreal to me. I also feel incredibly betrayed because I spent 4 years believing I was marrying someone who fully loved and accepted that a life with me meant a child-free life. Now I'm sitting here in an apartment that feels completely suffused with tension, wondering if he only married me expecting that I would eventually cave on something I consider a core, fundamental part of who I am. I don't want kids. Not now, not when I'm older, not once I hit a certain point in my career, not once I meet the right people, and certainly not just because Damon says he's getting old. I also don't think I should have to bring a whole human being into the world just because my husband wants one. But at the same time, I know I made a huge mistake by never explicitly pulling him aside and asking him directly what he wanted. I foolishly assumed his lack of an answer meant he didn't care either way, and he arrogantly assumed my very explicit answer meant I'd just change my mind once he put a ring on my finger. So now we're married, exactly 1 week in, and we apparently have completely incompatible ideas about what our future looks like. It has been very tense ever since our wedding night. This wasn't how I ever imagined my wedding night or our first week of marriage going, and now I am frantically overthinking everything, wondering if I should just have a kid for him, because I do love him so much, but at the same time, I know deep down that a baby deserves a mother who genuinely wants them with her whole heart. I would love some advice and insight into whether I am the asshole in this situation. Thanks in advance, everyone. Edit. Thank you so much for all the advice and helpful tips, everyone. The overwhelming consensus in the comments is telling me to consult a divorce lawyer or look into an annulment. But it's just not that simple for me. I come from a very cultural, religious, and traditional family, and I already rebelled enough in their eyes by 1, standing firm on not wanting kids, and 2, marrying a white man outside of our culture. The thought of bringing home news of a divorce after just 1 week. I am honestly scared it would put my dad in a coma from the sheer shock and shame. Still, I do agree that if this is something Damon refuses to drop, I will eventually have to take legal action to protect my life. Some people in the comments have also been asking why I don't want kids in the first place. I mentioned it briefly in a reply, but I will copy it here too, so everyone has context. I grew up in a very cultural and religious household, and while my parents were not bad people by any means, my upbringing still caused me a lot of deep-seated issues. I've struggled with my mental health for most of my life, and I think that trauma has played a massive role in how I feel about having children. One of my absolute biggest fears is bringing a child into this world, trying my absolute best to raise them right, and still somehow causing them severe emotional pain or leaving them broken in some way. That thought genuinely breaks my heart. The fact that my own parents weren't bad people honestly scares me even more than if they had been abusive. They were just regular, loving people who were doing what they thought was right within their cultural framework, and yet I still ended up carrying a massive amount of pain and damage from my childhood. It makes me terrified that despite my best intentions, I could unintentionally do the exact same thing to another innocent human being. I just don't think I'm ever going to be a good mother, and I don't feel mentally or emotionally regulated enough to take full responsibility for another human life. I know some people might say I could change my mind later or that I'd feel completely different once it was my own baby in my arms, but I really don't want to gamble with another person's entire life on the slight possibility that I might adjust. And then there's the physical reality of pregnancy itself, which is, very scary to me. Very, very scary. I don't know if any of that makes sense to outside people, but that's where my head is at. Thanks again, everyone. I will have a serious talk with him and update you all soon. Update. Hey everyone, sorry this update took a few days. Thank you so much for all the advice and support. There were a lot of opinions in the comments, as expected, and I knew posting this was going to bring out strong reactions. Still, I was surprised by how many people were supportive and encouraged me to look into an annulment. I also saw quite a few people calling Damon evil or saying he was a terrible person. I just want to clarify that I don't think he's a bad person. He's my husband, and I love him very much. We've been together for 4 years, and he's given me millions of amazing moments throughout our relationship. We've built a life together, and most of that life has been good. I don't believe one awful moment suddenly erases everything that came before it. That being said, I absolutely agree that what happened was a very, very serious moment, and it understandably made me question our entire marriage. It wasn't just the fact that we disagreed about children. It was realizing that we had apparently been looking at the same relationship and imagining completely different futures. I did speak to him about everything. At first, he told me that he loves me very much and that he can live without having children. He said that he never really needed kids and that what he said on our wedding night was a moment of weakness. He also told me that he wanted to redo our wedding night because he felt horrible about ruining such an important moment for me. As much as I would love to have that special moment back, that actually confused me even more. I reminded him that he specifically told me he had always assumed I would grow out of it. He had also talked about getting older and not having forever to wait if he wanted children. Those weren't small comments that could simply be forgotten because he was upset. He had apparently spent years believing I would eventually change my mind about something that I have always considered one of the most important decisions a person can make. I told him I didn't want him to simply say he could live without kids because he was afraid of losing me. That distinction matters to me. There is a huge difference between genuinely being happy with a child-free life and reluctantly accepting it because you don't want your marriage to end. If there is even a part of him that genuinely wants children, I don't think it would be fair to either of us to ignore that just to save the marriage. I don't want to wake up 5 or 10 years from now and have him resent me because he gave up something he actually wanted. I also don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering whether he secretly regrets choosing me. I know people sometimes talk about having children as if it's something couples can compromise on, but I don't think it works that way. There isn't really a middle ground where one person gets half of what they want. Either we have a child or we don't. If one person gives in, that decision affects another human being for the rest of their life. That's why I can't agree to have a baby simply because I love Damon. I also brought up the possibility of an annulment because after everything that happened, maybe that really is the best option for both of us. When I mentioned it, Damon went very quiet and just listened. We had a very emotional conversation that lasted a couple of hours. There was no huge screaming match or dramatic fight. It was actually much harder than that because we were both trying to understand how we had reached this point after 4 years together and a wedding that had happened only recently. Eventually, we reached a point where neither of us really knew what else to say. We agreed to step away from the conversation and come back to it after we'd both had some time to think. Almost 24 hours later, he came to me after work and told me that he had been thinking about everything we discussed. He said he doesn't want either of us to resent the other and that, unfortunately, maybe an annulment really is the best option. I'm not going to lie. Hearing him say that absolutely broke my heart. I love this man. I married him because I genuinely believed I was going to spend the rest of my life with him. When I picture my future, I pictured him being there. I didn't expect to be talking about ending our marriage only a few weeks after our wedding. The timing makes everything feel even stranger. We spent 4 years together. We had a wedding. We made plans for our future. Then, almost immediately afterward, we discovered that one of the biggest parts of that future had never actually been agreed upon. At the same time, I think we're both starting to understand something that is incredibly difficult to accept. Love doesn't automatically solve fundamental disagreements about the future. I don't want him to give up the possibility of becoming a father and spend years wondering what his life could have been like. I don't want him to look at friends who have children or see someone else's family and secretly feel like he sacrificed that life for me. At the same time, I can't promise him children when I have never wanted them and don't see that changing. I know I'm only 26, and I'm sure some people will tell me that I could change my mind. Maybe that's true for some people, but I can't make a lifelong decision based on the possibility that my feelings might be different someday. Right now, I know what I want my life to look like, and having children isn't part of it. Neither of us should have to live with resentment because we were afraid to let each other go. That's probably the hardest part for me to accept. I don't want our marriage to end, but I also don't want to preserve it at the cost of one of us eventually becoming bitter. So that's where things stand right now. We haven't officially done anything yet. Before we make any decisions, I need to talk to my parents. I want them to know what's happening before I suddenly tell them that my marriage to Damon is over. I'm not asking them for permission, and I don't think they're going to be able to talk me out of whatever decision I make, but I do feel that they deserve to hear this directly from me. I am absolutely not looking forward to that conversation. For those who read my original post, you know that I come from a very cultural, religious, and traditional family. I've already gone against a lot of what my family expected from me by choosing not to have children and by marrying Damon. My parents had expectations for what my life would look like. Getting married was one thing. Getting married and then potentially ending that marriage only a few weeks later is obviously going to be much harder for them to understand. Now I may have to tell them that my marriage is ending almost immediately after the wedding. I'm genuinely scared about how they're going to react. I know they're going to have questions, and I know some of those questions are probably going to be difficult to answer. I also know they may not understand why something like this couldn't simply be worked out between us. They may ask us to compromise. They may wonder why we can't just wait a few years and see what happens. They may think that because we love each other, we should be able to overcome this. But this isn't an argument over where we live or what kind of house we buy. It's about whether we become parents. That's not something I can compromise on just to make everyone else more comfortable. I also don't want my parents to think I made this decision impulsively. I didn't wake up one morning and decide that I suddenly didn't love my husband. This situation has forced me to confront something that should have been discussed long before we got married. I plan on going over after work tomorrow, or sometime later this week when they're free, and having the conversation in person. I don't know exactly how it's going to go, but I would rather tell them myself than have them find out another way. For now, Damon and I are giving ourselves some time to process everything. We haven't suddenly stopped loving each other, and this isn't some dramatic situation where one of us hates the other. There hasn't been some secret affair or another person involved. It's just a very painful realization that we may have wanted different lives without either of us understanding that until now. I know some people will probably think we should have had this conversation before getting married. They're absolutely right. We should have. There is no excuse for the fact that we spent 4 years talking about almost every aspect of our future and somehow never directly discussed children. We talked about money, careers, where we wanted to live, marriage, family, and what our lives would look like. Somehow, this one subject was never actually addressed. That was a huge mistake on both of our parts. I assumed that because I had always been clear about not wanting children, there was nothing else that needed to be said. He apparently assumed that because I was young, I would eventually change my mind. Those assumptions somehow existed alongside each other for 4 years, without either of us realizing how different they were. But now that we know where we stand, I don't think pretending the issue doesn't exist will make it disappear. I also don't think either of us should rush into making a decision just because we're scared of losing each other. If we do end the marriage, I want it to be because we've honestly accepted that this is a fundamental incompatibility, not because we had one emotional conversation and reacted immediately. At the same time, I don't want to drag this out for years hoping one of us will magically change. We're still figuring out what happens next, and honestly, I don't have a neat ending for this update. I wish I did. I wish I could come back and say we talked, everything made sense, and we're happily moving forward. Unfortunately, real life doesn't always give you that kind of ending. Right now, Damon and I are still talking and trying to understand what our options are. We both know that neither person should be pressured into becoming a parent or pressured into giving up the possibility of parenthood. Whatever happens, I want the decision to be honest. Thank you again to everyone who gave advice and shared your experiences. It honestly helped me more than I can explain. And if anyone has advice about how I should approach the conversation with my parents, especially given the family situation I described in my original post, I'm definitely open to hearing it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.